The whole purpose of the documentary is meant to show the difference between the closeness of a small town when it was very unpopulated compared to what's changed now that the numbers have more than quadrupled. This small town encompasses a large developing rural footprint. Most people moving here now are from a crowded suburban area looking for small town life. One neighboring township has over 23,000 citizens and it's growing. The other has over 6,000. We mean to put down a snapshot of how it was, how it is now, and hopefully inspire people to keep the small town feel regardless of its growth. So here's your small town, taken from the air in 1956, 1967. It's actually located in the very outside of two cities, Ann Arbor and Detroit. We are at the very, very bottom of Oakland County, the southwest corner. Today's Google Earth picture of South Lyon shows how the city itself has grown 4 square miles. That's why the population is 11,700. One of our citizens let us know that when you used to drive over the railroad tracks right by Wendy's and the other end of town where the actual railroad still passes. And as you're heading out Pontiac Trail, all you saw were farmland and trees. Each generation is affected by 4 major things: the leadership, a war or a conflict, moral changes, and of course technology. Before we worry about all of that, let's just find out when their families arrived in our small town. When did the Atchisons come to South Lyon?
Actually, my family is from basically Salem, and they came in from
1845.
Wow. In Salem. And then they were in Salem most of the time, and then my father bought a farm in South Lyon in 1948.
The Atchisons, that's the longest I've heard.
Yeah.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
Now, is that the same Jim Atchison where they
Yes.
named the park? Oh.
That's my brother.
The man in the hat standing on the hill.
Yes.
Big
Yeah.
Jim.
Oh.
Yeah.
Big Jim.
Yeah, very proud of him.
Came here, I think roughly it was 1950. My dad was working for the B&O Railroad, and he had got transferred to Detroit, and he worked there for a while and decided, I think he just liked the idea of the small town. He was a gentleman farmer with a garden and a couple of cows and a couple of horses for my sister and 100 chickens.
My grandparents lived on Spencer Road, and that's where my dad finished growing up. Spencer Road between 7 and 8 Mile. And then he married my mom. She was from Owasso, and we moved to Tutdale Road when I was little. Dad bought property on Hagedorn Street, and it was all from his house down. It was all woods and orchard, and we lived in that houseboat until he got enough money together to build the house in the back. Yeah, there was nobody back there, just us, but it didn't last long because he started selling property back there. So by the time I was about 12, there were already houses in behind us and across from us.
When do you think your family arrived in South Lyon?
Unfortunately, I was young. My grandfather passed away when I was 12, so I never really talked to him when he came to this area. But he came from Dearborn. He was a farmer there, and they moved down here. And I would say it was in the late 30s. It's as close as I can get. I grew up on our farm. Our farm was on 11 Mile, so the corner of 11 Mile Martindale. We had a square half mile, which actually butts up to the old railroad track, which is the bike trail now.
When did the Martins come to this area?
Well, but I can answer when our first ancestors came on my great-grandmother's side.
Okay.
So that they came in the 1830s.
And what was the last name?
Stark. This cemetery in town My great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents are in this cemetery. And I just recently found out my great-great-great-grandparents are buried at 9 Mile and Chubb.
You were telling me that there was a hospital here. Is it
was-
still a building?
No, they tore it down. It closed up in 40-something. It's right behind Lafayette Party Store. It's Havashaw Hospital.
Okay.
My dad's family moved to South Lyon in 1930. He came twice, actually. He came as a young man of about 18, worked for a number of years, and then went back to then Yugoslavia, married my grandma. My dad was born. Then he came back to the U.S. and worked for 6 years to save up enough money to bring them over. So my grandma and my dad came to the United States in 1929, September of 1929, 1 month before the stock market crash and the beginning of the Depression. You know, as the Depression eased and my grandpa got a job working at one of the factories in Detroit, either, I don't know, Great Lakes Steel or one of the auto companies, he was able to buy a farm on 6 Mile Road. The farm on 6 Mile at the corner of 6 Mile and Dixboro. That's where I grew up until I was 12.
Okay.
It was a dairy farm. My dad did dairy farming and crop farming.
They left Scotland, went to Ireland, Scotch-Irish. My great-grandparents had moved from Heartland right around 1910. He was a merchant in town. His first store, but it was on the corner right at Main Street. And from there, he moved across the street to the storefront that was in bad repair for many, many years. But I understand there's a nice gift shop in there now.
Mr. Rocco, hello. I know that you and Anita came out here as teachers, so maybe you want to start by telling us, when did you guys arrive?
Okay, we came out here in 1965 after teaching in Byron for 4 years. She taught every year, and I taught at the old Sayre Elementary School, the entire middle school in South Lyon. From the 450 that were here in 1965, there's been a lot of growth. I had 27 here. So. I was principal when Centennial opened.
I love your perspective because your family's been here a very long time. Can you tell us as much as you know?
Well, as much as I know my dad's grandfather, or actually my great-grandfather, lived on Griswold Road, and his place was called Sugarbush, his farm. And they were gatherers of maple sap and made maple syrup for quite a few years there. And I remember even when I started riding the bus to school, I remember seeing people collecting the sap along 9 Mile Road. Grandparents on my mother's side, they were on Napier Road. They had a farm, and they had put a well down and they struck natural gas, and they were one of the few people that had natural gas ahead of everybody else, until one night all of a sudden they heard this noise and shaking, and it shot the pipe out of the ground, and that was the end of their natural gas. So they were all farmers.
Oh.
He was a farmer, but he also was a mason, and we think he might have put the block in this house, and this was built in 1947. I really think he laid the block for this house that we've lived in now for 38 years or 40, almost 40 years now.
And then you came and bought it.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I think that's so cool.
We lived on Milford Road in New Hudson. Third sibling came along. We couldn't stay there anymore.
Yeah.
And so we moved to a farm, South Hill Road.
Okay.
And that's where I grew up then.
When do you think your family, someone in your great-grandparent, whatever, came to South Lyon?
I can tell you.
Go ahead.
I was 4, so you were 2.
2.
Anyway, our father got a job at Michigan Seamless Tube Company. That had been 1952 or 3.
Fun.
My dad was from Flint,
Oh,
and our mom was from all over. He didn't have anywhere to live in the beginning, so he stayed at the hotel.
notorious stories about the hotel.
Oh, yes. Yeah, he has good stories about the hotel.
He was a lumberjack in Canada. My dad worked for Showerman's. Of course, that was when Showerman Supermarket. He was a volunteer fireman there, and worked there until he retired. But as a meat cutter, they lived right in town, just right behind where Showerman's Supermarket was, and that's when it was right on Pontiac Trail.
My family, the Showerman family, probably moved here in the 1880s. He was a farmer. So he had numerous farms, never owned one of them.
Oh.
Always rented. That's what we call a dirt poor farmer.
Yeah.
He moved the family to Rosebush, Michigan, to haul sugar beets for a job. And my dad said, "I'm not going." He was 14. Opened up his first grocery store, which is where the stone building is. And my grandfather sold all of his farm equipment, and he amassed $500, and he loaned it to my dad, and they went into business.
How are you? This is beautiful. I'm a small town girl.
Where are you from?
East Birmingham. That's where I grew up.
Yeah, that's a little town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I liked it in the UP, and I think it was a great place to bring up kids, but there are no jobs. I would have gone back there if there were jobs. I started in 7th and 8th grade in the old board office. I think that was 59.
Oh, okay. And is South Lyon your first teaching position?
First and only one. And then I go to 9th grade, then 10th, and 11th, and then 12th.
Do you know when the Wisemans arrived in South Lyon?
I believe probably near the end of the 20s, beginning of the 30s. The Depression had hit. They were a family of 11 siblings, and they came up to Michigan because that's where the jobs were. They worked at the tube mill. My dad worked there, but then he went on to General Motors and worked for Hydromatic.
The Depression didn't kill the tube mill?
No, because there was work there because they came up. And my dad always said, I drove through South Lyon. He said, this is where I want to raise my family.
Oh. And how many people are here?
844.
What brought you to South Lyon, and do you remember what year?
1960, Eastern Michigan. Originally started at Ferndale.
Bill, what did you teach here?
History.
Weren't you varsity basketball?
He also started both the boys and girls golf teams. We came here at midterm. It was the only job open. We're walking through town and somebody said, "Oh, a new couple here. Where are you living?" And we said, "Well, we don't have any place." "Oh, just a minute." Took us over to a duplex. He said, "Where's your furniture?" And we said, "Well, we don't have any." "Oh, just wait a minute." By evening, we had an apartment completely furnished, even to food in the refrigerator.
Wow.
I graduated as a pharmacist. In '69, we came out to South Lyon and bought Enders out. And now, 2 stores in South Lyon, right next door to each other, Spencer's Drug and South Lyon Pharmacy. The very first person that came in the store, side door, and said, "Norm, whatever you need, you come and get." And that was Stan Spencer. We worked together. If he ran out of something, he came down. If I needed something, I went up and got through his drawers. Went on for years like that until Stan Spencer passed away. I mean, it was that close-knit.
Mr. Streight, so happy to see you again. When did you first come to South Lyon?
1967. I was in middle school back then.
So you were originally a middle school teacher there?
Right.
Okay. How did you meet your lovely Mrs. Doane?
When I was in the service, my folks were living in Belleville.
Okay.
So I went there. So I came home, got discharged, drove from San Antonio, Texas up. And I drove up in the middle of winter in December. And I can remember pulling in the Ypsilanti. And I pulled up there at about 2 in the morning to get a hot cup of coffee because I was freezing.
Yeah.
Pulled up in a sofa, put the car in park, and I slid back down the hill. And I said, "What in the world am I doing here?" I searched a gas station. And they said, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to school." We'll come down, so I worked for him. And it happened to be right across the street from her dad's business. But she would drive over, harass me to get 25 cents for the gas. Her brother came over and said, "What? You want to go on a blind date?" And I said, "Not really." So he talked me into it, and that's how I met her.
It's so cute. So cute. I'm going to call you Peggy Doane because that's how everyone knows you. Do you know why they call it Doane Road?
Yes, it was named after my great-great-grandfather who moved out here in the 1830s. I'd have to check the correct date.
Wow.
And he lived in a little cottage on the Silver Lake. And then he built the big house on the corner, which is the homestead.
So his farmer's lane went all the way from Rushton here?
Oh, he had, what, 200 and some acres.
Okay, do you know what he farmed?
But the sheep was the main thing. When they sold the house here in 1917, they moved to Lake Street. And those houses were called Sears and Roebuck.
Right.
Coming up next week, question 2. Where were you when you heard the president was killed?
National, international news.
You might be surprised. Maybe these kids aren't as bothered as you think. Here's our leadership upheaval. Let's find out what happened. Join us next week for episode 2 from our small town. See our Instagram and YouTube for updates on all our stars and a behind-the-scenes look at Smalltown. Oh, good morning. Yes, the dawn has not come. Anyway, I hope you enjoy our more than a dozen guests who are sharing their memories with you, talking about growing up in a small town, going to school, being in high school, getting in trouble, all those things that we all did.